And welcome into another episode of Tiger Territory, part of the Val Territory Network, a Detroit Tigers podcast. I'm Kieran Steckley. With me, as always, is a man who gets cold. He doesn't actually ever get a cold. He is Cody Stavenhagen. How you doing?
I think you nailed it right there. I'm trying to figure out if I've adjusted to Michigan winters at all. Like, I still don't like the cold, but I think maybe I'm a little better at handling it somewhat, like walking the dog, stuff like that. I go out and do it just to make myself. And cold, no, I don't really believe in getting colds. So
There you go. There you go. I could tell you I was in Buffalo a couple weeks ago, Patriots-Bills game, and it was like 9+ wind chill. Didn't have the most grand old time in that environment, so I could say I am not that well adjusted. But we're going to get some precip here in Texas, so we'll see how your boy does here later in the week.
all right.
Speaking of Texas and Texas boys, I hope you guys had a chance to listen to our Austin Jackson introduction episode. Austin's going to be joining us on average about once a week there for us, and I can tell you he's a lot of fun. I can tell you Cody and I met up with him at winter meetings, and then obviously we did a pod together, and same guy the entire time. Like, just the most down to earth dude.
Awesome.
And like sharing some stories. Not even like any crazy stories, just like life on the ranch stories that were awesome.
We gotta get him to tell that Bobcat story on the podcast. All right. I have a question. We are doing an Austin Jackson mailbag episode. Hopefully for later this week, depending on what the Tigers do. So we're soliciting questions. I've already got one question. Austin, tell the people your Bobcat story.
Yes. And so you can on Twitter at Tiger Territory _ at Cody Stavenhagen at Kieran _ Steckley. You can ask their questions there, or I'll just say this. You're more likely to get it answered if you are subscribed to our YouTube channel and ask a question on this episode's page as a comment. So just a little incentive there to help grow our YouTube page. I'm very, very happy with how much it's grown in the off season. So thank you everybody for listening, liking, subscribing, wherever you listen, wherever you watch. It's a lot of fun to do what we do, and it's a lot of fun to see that people enjoy what we do. Okay. So yes, Austin Jackson.
Closing in on 1,000 subscribers, guys. We're trying to get there. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah. So, and if you enjoyed Austin, there's gonna be much more of him, and very thankful that he decided to join us on this venture here. All right. Speaking of adventures, the Tigers have signed nobody. They haven't signed anybody since the last time that we talked. We're still in the.
They're only a couple weeks removed from signing somebody. Give them a little buffer before we start roasting them again. Come on.
It's not a roast. It's just saying, it's just been a second. I know the holidays happen, and so we're still into speculation. And now, Cody, for the first time, because we haven't done this year, it was Bregman Watch 2024. Now it's Bregman Watch 2025, and it feels like we've talked about this, but then more things happen of what we talked about, so then we decide to talk about it again. So what I'm referring to is sort of the framing of like the Bregman reporting, and this is not specific to anybody. It could be anybody that's verified or unverified or aggregate accounts or whatever. But the way that the Bregman stuff kind of goes into my timeline on social media is a bunch of things that I kind of read through. And I'm like, all right, well, there's nothing here. You get phrases like, it's the Blue Jays and the Tigers. And then phrases like, so-and-so team is, quote, still in, which is as meaningless a phrase in free agency as it gets. Still in. Everybody's still in. Everybody is eligible to sign Alex Bregman. So, like, the entire, Korean baseball teams are still in to sign Alex Bregman. Like, everybody's in on it. So, I would just say numbers, contracts, years, dollars, all that stuff, incentives. It's all kind of pixie dust. That doesn't necessarily mean anything right now. That doesn't mean that there's not merit to these things going out there. However, it's hard for me to get like emotionally attached to a lot of these updates because of the language that's being used, and it feels like a lot of fodder being put out there by organizations and probably Bregman's team as well. He is a Boris client, so you got anything for Bregman Watch 2025?
Number one, I'm not sure how much fodder is even being put out there. If you look at what has been said, like from myself, from other reporters, there's not all that much substance. I reported last week, Tigers, Blue Jays, Red Sox were all still in. No decision was imminent. That was, I think, pretty solid reporting. I'm not sure anyone's really said anything a lot more tangible than that. It's actually been, despite the constant noise, despite the incredible fodder Bregman Watch has been for social media, we don't know a lot about what's actually going on in these negotiations. And despite last week being maddening, and I went on the Big Foul Territory show and talked about it. I went on MLB Network Radio and talked about it. I'm not sure anything happened last week. Like, did we have any like real update of some change? I don't think we do. You're right. The framing has become a little bit different as more people have weighed in. But I've got no tangible updates that indicate we're any closer to a decision here. My big takeaway from Bregman Watch, man, MLB needs some sort of free agency deadline because this is maddening. This is frustrating. I don't think Alex Bregman is refreshing his phone near as much as I am or near as much as a lot of Tigers fans are. I don't know what the actual thing here is. It seems pretty clear. This is, again, reading the tea leaves more than reporting that the Tigers have some number they're not going to go above. The Red Sox, look, they have some roster things to figure out and probably a number they don't want to go above. I don't know what's going on with the Blue Jays, but probably similar. I think the idea of Bregman getting 7,200 is probably out the window at this point. But I do wonder, like, some team's not just going to come and throw 6,180 on the table. Like, I feel like that's what should happen. I don't know that that's what's going to happen. But the longer this drags on, either Bregman's going to sign well below what he originally wanted, or when teams like the Tigers don't get aggressive and either come up with a creative contract or just say, hey, here's 6,180, 6,185, whatever. It does leave the door open for someone to swoop in later in this process. I don't know, but it really is kind of frustrating as we all sit here and just nothing happens. What if there were a deadline to create action on the free agent market? Similarly, we know the Tigers want to sign a relief pitcher. No one in the whole league is signing relievers. I'm not really sure what the rationale is for that one. It's kind of silly. I think everyone's waiting on another team to, like, quote unquote, set the market. This shows these risk adverse front offices. It gets a little bit silly. When it comes to Bregman, the Tigers are either going to get him on like a huge discount and come out looking amazing, or they're going to miss out and they're going to look really bad. I don't know which one it's going to be.
So, a couple things there. One, I'm 100% in favor of a free agency deadline. I would probably argue free agency technically starts too soon for Major League Baseball. Not that that really matters all that much, but there's no anticipation of free agency because it's like, all right, season's over, free agency begins, like that, right? So anything that like ups the ante a little bit and adds a little sense of urgency in baseball, like I'm in favor of it because I think that creates more interest, especially during this time. It's obviously a football, college football, little bit NBA dominated time of the year, right? So number one, in favor of that. Number two, I'm gonna quote your boy Jerry Jones here for a second, Cody, and Jerry Jones has said that he's never ever regretted overpaying for something he really wanted. He's only regretted under offering something he really wanted. So my question for that is, we talk about the things.
The natural comeback is like, how long has it been since the Cowboys were in the NFC title game?
I mean, but like he has made them relevant. I mean, we'll do a Jerry Jones podcast another time. But that's just, but that's more of like, but that's the business part of it. The business part of the Cowboys is impeccable. All right. So anyway, but like we talk about the things we don't know. I think another underrated thing we don't know in regards to Bregman Watch 2025 is how much do the Tigers really want Bregman? Because when you're looking at, I'll round up to an even number four teams that are in on Alex Bregman. You know, the three you mentioned, and then we'll throw just generic wild card team out there. So we'll make it four. If there is a small amount of competition for the services of Alex Bregman, and we know the numbers are pretty much all right there of what the market value for him is. I feel like if you really wanted him, you could just get him. You could just get him and live with, like, I don't know, 110, 120 cents on the dollar overpay. Like, if you really wanted him, that could happen. So part of me is like, how much do they really want him? I don't know.
Well, I think this is a front office that is, and perhaps an ownership too, but front office just as big, if not a bigger part of it, that is that really sticks to its guns in terms of value, in terms of market value, in terms of, especially in multi-year deals. They are very set in that. So I think it has less to do with wanting the player and more to do with like adhering to, the term we've like good baseball decision Scott Harris uses a lot. Like, I think they view that through the lens of economics. And so they do not want to overpay, especially on longer term deals that could have consequences down the road. I'm not sure that that's right. It's like, I don't know. Anyone tried to buy a house lately? I did almost a couple years ago. Good luck trying to find a deal. Good luck trying to get below market value. A lot of people these days pay above market, quote unquote, market value. And it comes down to like, well, do you want a house or do you want to keep renting? It's a little bit oversimplified, but like, do you want to win the World Series or do you want to keep, fighting tooth and nail for a wild card spot? I think that's what it comes down to. And now it is possible we're overvalued. Like, Bregman has kind of become this Godzilla. Like, he's become like, I saw someone like Tigers Twitter has made Alex Bregman mid-2000s A-Rod. And it's kind of right. Like, he is 31, coming off a down year. We're going to talk about Anthony Santander in a minute. And it's interesting to compare their win probability added. Alex Bregman was negative last year, minus 0.84. I think he's a great player. I think the Tigers really need him. I think they should. There's no reason they shouldn't just be willing to pay 6,185. If they end up signing him at a bigger discount, Scott Harris will look like a genius. But again, if they don't, man.
Well, sometimes there is a risk of trying to be the smartest person in the room. And this is not an indictment of Scott at all. This is just a general thing. I think a lot of front office types try to kind of be that guy or the most clever guy in the room. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of like...
That's a problem in baseball, is now you have about 23 front offices all kind of trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, and, probably...
I would argue, like, the Rangers won the World Series because they don't really do that, or they weren't when they were building this roster. And the Dodgers have found a way to be the smartest people in the room while also being the most aggressive people in the room. And them and maybe the Mets are kind of the only teams operating on that wavelength.
Yeah, well, there's... With the Dodgers, it's... I don't want to compare the successes, but I remember when, like, the Houston Rockets back in the day had, like, this, like, they were, like, breaking everybody's mind with, like, the passes, the threes. James Harden becomes MVP, and it's like, man, the analytics. And some people were like, I don't know, analytics, or is it the fact that James Harden's a lefty who can shoot threes and passes really well? It's like, are the Dodgers the smartest front office, or... did they just say, hey, the best players, we're going to get them and we're going to pay them? Now, that doesn't mean they're not smart, blah, blah, blah. I'm not taking anything away from the Dodgers.
Just even innovating, like deferred money and being creative in contracts.
Yeah, it is smart, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out, like, Ohtani is worth whatever dollar amount you can get him to sign to. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that Mookie Betts is going to be more valuable than these 5 minor leaguers that you send to get him. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it takes a willingness. It takes, I'm not trying to criticize the Dodgers, but it's like, oh, yeah, they have the best players. Or like the Yankees. It's like, oh, yeah, they have the best players. It makes sense. Yeah. They don't have to be that creative to figure out that Juan Soto is a great player. That's all I'm saying. Speaking of, like, mindset and and talent development. We've had a lot happen in the past year, Cody, with our Parker Meadows experience. And last year we talked about how everyone's just kind of banking on Parker Meadows being okay at the plate. And then this is going to work out. He's going to play center field and like everything's going to be good. Riley Green doesn't have to play center. Like you're going to save his body, blah, blah, blah. And then Parker Meadows got off to a horrid start at the plate. Had to get sent down. To his credit, came back up. Then he got hurt, but came back and was obviously an instrumental part in that run to the postseason and through the postseason. Now I kind of feel like we're doing a little bit of the same thing, ironically, with kind of more evidence that like we should feel better, but we're just kind of like, he was a 2-WAR player last year despite that horrid stretch of offensively. I do it too. This is not me criticizing anybody. I do it too. I am very excited about the possibility of Parker Meadows. But then I take a step back and I'm like, but am I ever going to actually be confident year to year with Parker? Or even like, we'll say like quarter of season to quarter of season, basically. There's still going to be, because it's Parker Meadows, because it's his whole story, there's still going to be some anxiety about whether like, can he like really hack it at the plate over a long period of time, over the course of a season plus. I think he can. But at the same time, I'm getting a little nervous that no one else, I have not seen much level of anxiety about like, are we still good here? Are we still good here? Because just like last year, even more so this year with the pressure on the team to, expectation win the AL Central, like if this don't work, it throws a lot of things in motion and a lot of stuff that we're talking about now becomes largely irrelevant.
Yeah, I think it's very, like, the ideal world scenario is Parker Meadows is your leadoff hitter, and he's a 4 or 5 win player, and he's dynamic, and he's an all-star.
Sounds awesome.
I don't know that that's necessarily the most realistic scenario. He played at that level for a month plus, and he was great after coming back from injury and coming back from the minor leagues. But I'm not a huge believer in, like, setting off these sample sizes and treating them as the whole does not exist. And I know, like, I've heard it from.
That's basically all we've done for the past 4 years with, like, we've done it with Javier. We've done it with Torque. We've done it with everybody. Yeah.
And I hear it from the Tigers front office. Well, you're just looking at this when if you just broke it down to this sample, and it's like, well, yes, I know, but it's a 162 game season for a reason.
And they all
Parker Meadows made some improvements. He's obviously, I think he can do this. I think I have 2 thoughts. One, if you sign a guy like an Alex Bregman, take some pressure off Parker Meadows to hit a little bit. There is a reality where if he can hit good enough and just play elite defense and run the bases at a high level, like, he does not have to hit at a crazy level for this team to be really good. But looking at the Fangraphs projections, he's picked to, Zips has him hitting 233 with a 96 OPS plus. It has him as a 2-win player. Might disappoint some people, but I kind of like, I could see that world. For as good as he is, he's like, he had 231 against breaking balls, whiffed 29% of the time. He whiffed 34.2% against off speed. A lot of that probably was in the first part of the season, but he can be susceptible to that. There's still some holes in his swing at the plate. And then Zips does an interesting thing where it shows the 80th and 20th percentile in the projections. So this is kind of layperson's terms. Zips takes all these numbers, runs them through a simulation like 1,000 times, and then kind of comes up with an aggregate that is what you see as the projections. But like the 80th presents like his best outcomes. So that had him hitting 256, 327 on base, 3.3 WAR. The 20th percentile WAR, so the bottom 20% of the projections, 0.6. To compare it, Riley Green is either 4.8 WAR to 2.1 WAR. I don't know if this is making any sense because it's harder to do without showing you guys the numbers. But basically, Zips shows a large range of outcomes possible for Parker Meadows, which is in a way unsatisfying, but I think this represents there's still a lot of volatility possible in his game.
100%. And part of like the reason that I'm still always going to get excited for the Parker Meadows is like you look at his season last year. I'm on Baseball Reference. His offensive WAR was 1.7. His defensive WAR was 0.8. Now, obviously, that's a center field. Obviously, everybody's best fielder is in center field, right? So we understand all that. But it's like, man, you could get 1.7. You have any sort of improvement. You're looking at, approaching 2 offensive WAR. Like, sorry, you're feeling pretty good. But there's just so much has happened in his pro career that it's not that I'm not confident in him. Is that like if nobody else is kind of talking about these range of outcomes, it makes me think, are we kind of setting ourselves up here? And obviously the front office, AJ, all that stuff, they're not ignorant to any of this. But just in terms of like how we discuss the team, how we smartly analyze the team, I think it has to be like a pretty good factor. And then it's also, like he always is, kind of a microcosm for this whole mantra of team building. Whereas like, the AJ quote from winter meeting, it's like, we can't be last year's team. We have to be better. We're trying to win the Central, blah, blah, blah. That's all well and good. But if you're running it back with like everybody, almost everybody, and you have to bank on this this intangible thing to become tangible, which is development, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard, year to year. And credit to what they've been able to do, but we've also seen examples of where it hasn't worked. A guy just lost his position a couple weeks ago because it has not worked with all the talent in the world. So
yeah, I think Meadows has a higher floor than Torkelson just because of the defense, the base running. Like I said, I do think I'm not necessarily worried about Parker Meadows having to go back to the minor leagues. I'm just not sure, he's guaranteed to hit this kind of star ceiling that has kind of been thrust upon him. And then this is probably like the 6th time we've mentioned this in passing, but Trey Sweeney is this year's Parker Meadows. Like we just all think he's the shortstop, and it's like he did some good things, but this is a 24-year-old player who up until last year had never quite projected as anything more than like a utility infielder. He only hit 218. He only walked 5.9% of the time. Scares me, man, because there's a world where Trey Sweeney has the Parker Meadows first 30, 40 games and has to go back to AAA. And then you're like, as of right now, I don't know what you're doing at shortstop. Then
it's like,
Javier Baez, baby.
Welcome to Ryan Kreidler season. You know what I mean? Like, and do that again. So yeah. So just thought sometimes, it's early January. Sometimes this is really an outlet for me to just kind of get out thoughts that I just kind of have in my head, and I don't even know how valid they are, but it's just like I just kind of have to get them out there and bounce them off you and everybody else who wants to tell me how if they feel the same way or if I'm wrong. Like, like it's there's a lot going on, despite the fact technically not a whole lot has gone on right now.
Yeah, well, let's go on to another player who could ease some of this anxiety. All right, we've heard mentions of the Tigers having interest on Anthony Santander. This was actually pretty quiet for me until a couple of days ago. I had not heard a lot of this for myself. Finally did. There is some interest here. The Tigers have done a deep dive on Santander recently. They're looking into this. I'm still, as like a plan B for Bregman, I'm still skeptical. Like, it's not that this interest isn't real, but it's like, I have a hard time seeing Anthony Santander wearing a Detroit Tigers uniform. Supposedly he's seeking $500, and the good about Santander is obviously the power. Dude had 44 homers last year. Can you imagine putting 44 homers in the Tigers lineup? Man, that would be awesome. But he's a 30-year-old player who is a pretty atrocious outfielder, who's a pretty bad base runner. The Tigers just signed a player who is a pretty atrocious fielder and a pretty bad base runner. And especially if you're going to get Santander in a 4 to 5 year deal, I mean, even next year, but especially going into the future, I think it would have to take up a lot of DH at bats, which AJ Hinch has notoriously been like pretty opposed to. there was a time last offseason where I was all about get JD Martinez for 1 year, have him DH, like whatever. I don't think I would feel the same in this Tigers lifespan, and especially if we're talking a multi-year deal. Just going to take ABs away from other players. Right now, you have some guys like Bersenio and Lorenzo on the rise, who in theory in 4 or 5 years' time would occupy some DH at bats. So those are reasons I don't love it, especially if we're talking the longer contract. But I think the reason the Tigers are in on Santander is much like Bregman. What if no one signs this guy? And what if you can get him for, say, 2 or 3 years? I wonder if it's a similar philosophy and just like we're staying in case the market kind of crashes and we can get him on a deal that is a little bit more to our liking. What do you think, Kieran?
So in the past couple of days, there's been reports that he has been offered for 82, and I believe that's a Toronto offer, I believe is what the reports are.
He does kind of have Blue Jay written all over him, I think.
Yeah. I did a little bit of a dive on Santander, and I'm going to try to say that as correctly as I can. And there's the way I think about it is if this would be a move to make if you really thought you were just like one,
right?
Like I would say, I don't want to say slightly above average, but decently above average bat away from winning a pennant. And then, whatever happens in the World Series, because especially for this team specifically, excuse me, as a right-handed hitter. So obviously, versus left-handed pitching, 123 WRC plus. All right. He's a 132 as a lefty, obviously against right-handed pitching. And he has a pretty decent pull percentage, 32.5. That's above league average. You want that for obviously, the porch and right field. He limits you. Like he's that rare player that makes you better. He raises your floor, but he also limits you of what you can do with your roster, which is obviously you just talked about. And like the 2025 version of myself would love to see Santander on this team because, again, like he could provide like a little bit of a spark offensively. But but there is a lot of possibility of him being detrimental to the overall makeup of the team. And if you mentioned some of the young guys, what if Kerry Carpenter just becomes a DH in 2 years? I mean, that's a real
even if
thing.
you sign Santander, you're looking at Kerry Carpenter's playing the outfield almost every day, I think.
Yeah. So
are you comfortable with that? Like, I'm not sure.
And you probably don't want to limit the possibility of like, all right, he's just our DH for the next 3 years. Talking about Carpenter. So yeah, I just feel like I would like it for 2025, and then as I would try to analyze a way to make this team better in the years that follow, I just don't know if I would be as down for whatever contract. But if it's one of those things that, as you talk about market collapse, I'm down to give 3-year deals to any of these cats with opt-outs after 1 or opt-outs after 2. Like if he took like a Bellinger type deal, maybe you'd want a little bit more organizational leverage. But like, something like that, like I'm open to it because I think he definitely makes your 2025 roster. He raises your floor offensively. But then you would have to kind of change the makeup of the rest of the roster around him. You probably have to, with him and Torres in the lineup, you probably have to emphasize base running a little bit more for some of these other guys in the lineup. And then you would have to, manufacture your lineups a little bit because he is a switch. These are all, relatively good problems, but it feels like if you think you're a year away, you do it. If you still want to kind of build up the same way you've been building, this would be a building block that wouldn't match the overall wall, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And the other glaring concern with Santander, like you're basically just banking on power. 44 homers was a career high. He had 28 the year before that, 33 the year before that. You're going to put him in a tough ballpark to hit home runs and just hope he can sustain that into his 30s. I feel like there are a lot of empty calories in Santander at bats. 246 career hitter, 307 lifetime on base percentage. Doesn't really help your whole on base thing very much. He actually doesn't strike out as much as it would seem based on those numbers. What he does is he hits the ball in the air a lot, and that's not always a good thing. We talk about the volatility of BABIP. His batting average in balls in play is almost historically, with the exception of 2023, below league average, 263 lifetime. It's because he gets a lot of pop-ups. I think like top 2 or 3 in the league in terms of infield pop-up percentage. Now, you guys can go look at that leaderboard. I don't have it in front of me, but Alex Bregman is like 10 or 11 on that list. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. But that just concerns me. There's so much stake being put into basically his ability to hit home runs. And yeah, maybe you put him in Comerica and he hits like more doubles or whatever. And it's not like Baltimore was the ultimate hitter's park, but it just doesn't seem to mesh with like the ethos of this team is how I view Anthony Santander.
Yeah. And again, would make the team better, but you would have to, so I don't want to get that lost in there. Would make the team better, but like if you're asking me which contract would I'd rather stomach, I'm going to say Bregman. So that's just how I feel. All right. Want to remind everybody once again, if you want to ask a question to Austin Jackson, we will read it and he will answer. That's how Q&As work. And if you send it on Twitter, it's a good chance we'll read it. If you do it on our YouTube page at the bottom of this episode and you subscribe to our YouTube page, there's a better chance that we will ask it. So reminder, at Tiger Territory _ at Cody Stavenhagen. I'm at Kieran _ Steckley, and our YouTube page, Tiger Territory Podcast, and also Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. So I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank everyone who chimed in for the Austin Jackson episode. There's going to be a lot more where that came from. So for Cody Stavenhagen, I'm Kieran Steckley. Everybody have a great day.